Genlock over synchronization system at NAB.
Yeah, throw a phone
Al Lamshed, of course, the engineering vice president of SMPTE.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
And now for something totally different, Michael's going to talk about the audio perspective.
Well,
Are there any audio drones?
I'll bet they are. Well, I'll be the odd man out on a couple of accounts. Hey, I think I'm the only tie in the room. Certainly the only waistcoat in the room. And I'm an operator. I mean, I'm going to talk about the operations perspective as opposed to an engineering perspective and audio to boot. So I'll try to make this brief. Yeah, I agree with this problem with calling something IP production. It's terrifying. You're never entirely certain what someone's talking about. Remote production is equally evil because it's backwards. We already do remote production. I don't know what you call it, inverse remote production or insourcing, or I don't know what you call it, but one way or the other, the engineering is going to get sorted out, and one way or the other, cost is going to drive this new model. And you know, I'm kind of the camp that thinks that, you know, if those large full-scale mobile units are dinosaurs, the asteroid may very well already have hit the Earth, but the ash cloud hasn't choked out the sun yet. Look, there's always going to be trucks, but just on the cost basis alone, I mean, ESPN's numbers, just from the tiny little portion of their entire portfolio they're going to produce using their REMI model this year, 89 scheduled events in this calendar year, just that tiny little infinitesimal fraction of their entire system represents a massive cost savings. And so we're excited about it for a couple of reasons. I mean, cost is going to be the driver, done. Maybe for the picture department, maybe that's enough. But for the audio department, we're really excited about this for a completely different reason. You can't do good audio in the back of a 53-foot battle wagon. It's a hostile environment. Period. Full stop. Done. We're done. That's the end of the discussion. We get production moved back into large-scale standing facilities, and you got a chance at some quality. You got a chance at some consistency, and furthermore, I've got massive staffing reserves. You know, two of our big pillars, news and sports, are fueled by being able to send people and technology out in the field, make a piece of television, transmit it back to the network center, and call it a day. But that necessarily means that, given the way things have gone over the last 30 years, we're essentially hostage to, you know, a population of mercenary freelancers. And you know, frankly, this may be one of the only ways, as an operations manager, that I can imagine stemming the tide of this sort of reduction in force we're going to suffer at the networks over the next coming years because of production automation. And maybe one of the only ways I can imagine stopping the shrinkage and maybe even growing is because we're starting to pull production back into the center, away from the edge and back to the center. And from an audio point of view, I'm super excited about it. And I'm especially convinced that what comes next for audio may only be possible in standing facilities. It's already, I've spent enough thousands of hours in the back of a mobile unit to know what I'm talking about. And the guys back there, they're already busier than one-legged men in ass-kicking competitions. They got no time for extra. You can barely do 5.1 in the back of a truck. You're gonna do 12.1? You're gonna do something with an entirely object-based workflow that requires a lot of other, you know, human intervention. It's really tough to imagine. So, the first thing for me was that this we're on the cusp. This is going to happen. It's going to happen much sooner than some people imagine. Are we going to flush all of the trucks anytime soon? No, of course not. We can't. We just can't move that fast. And frankly, it's a big country. It's a big continent. It's a big globe. And getting the amount of bandwidth back to the network center to do something like a football game, a professional football game, is, you know, pretty tough. It might be different if, it might be one thing if we're at the Bell Center in Montreal. It might be one thing at the Rogers Center in Toronto or the stadium in Hamilton. It's quite another thing from some random American arena maybe. So the really big takeaway for me though was all of the talk about the future. and specifically about the possibility of having, or the seeming eventuality that we're going to end up with an audio candidate standard for whatever comes next, that's going to be either fully object-based or a hybrid object-based audio framework. And while that's really exciting, I think all this talk about the future comes with a not so subtle assumption, or the underlying assumption, that we're finished with the present. And frankly, a lot of people haven't mastered the present yet. And we're already talking about the future. And I think what became clear with this show, because for the first time it wasn't academic, we were able to see working demonstrations of the kinds of viewer experiences that viewers might be able to create for themselves under these new frameworks. When it became obvious that this architecture this is going to be a really big deal, and it's going to make the transitions that have come before, from analog to digital, from stereo to 5.1, seem almost pedestrian by comparison. I'm as a mixer, as a sound professional, I'm happy and eager to explore things like 13.1 surround. I mean, bring it on. The more speakers, the merrier, frankly. And I'm happy to admit that anything that's produced at some format greater than 5.1 is going to be marginal. That's not going to be the news. It's maybe not even going to be a hockey game. And maybe even more marginal will be the number of viewers in their home environment who can actually listen to it in its original form. I totally get that. But I also get that the architecture and the framework that's going to allow us to even have those discussions is the same framework that's going to guarantee the translatability of the content in a way that we can't now. Many people are still struggling with what are people hearing at home in 2-channel when what's emitting from the network is 5.1, real or imagined. So that framework is going to get us up much closer to guaranteeing that translatability, and more importantly, from my point of view of being able to talk to a client, object-based audio is really going to open the door to completely and legitimately new ways of thinking about content creation. And the way for some genres the audience may be allowed to, I hesitate to say the word interact because it isn't interact, but the last 5 years has been about TV everywhere. So let the audience watch whatever they want to watch, wherever they want to watch it, whenever they want to watch it. But the how has been immutable. Like, we haven't talked about the how. My viewers watch one of my documentaries on this device, and they get the same product, just scaled down, that they're going to see at home on their large device. And short of hearing a down mix of the 5.1 original, that's really the only concession made to the differing places and vehicles that the audience might choose to absorb the content. And object-based audio is going to give us a different way of thinking about that. So I think there's reason for some optimism, but maybe the thing that we're most excited about is that the audience is going to have the possibility to tell the difference again. In the very early days of HD, most especially in this country, you turned on the TV and what you were presented with was either stereo or some form of multi-channel. And so it was pretty obvious, this program is in stereo, this program is in 5.1. It didn't take very long, especially given our struggles with simulcast substitution, before that was no longer the case. In most signals, broadcast signals in this country and in the US, it's 5.1 all the time. Why? Because of the upmixers in the transmit chain. And if you happen to push stereo at master control, it's going to get turned into some ersatz 5.1. And so what does that mean for the audience? It means that the delta between fake 5.1 and real 5.1 in many genres is so subtle a difference that the audience simply can't tell. And so for very cynical producers or broadcasters, it's entirely sensible for them to say, why would we even bother? And what's clear to me in watching and listening to not just higher order surround material, but also object-based material which presents the viewer with the possibility of selecting different experiences, which seem to be a bit of a buzzword, especially from Dolby. It's clear to me that it's not going to be possible to fake that. There's going to be no magic box which is going to take that big pile of source material you have and magically stir it into a bunch of experiences that the audience can pick from. That only those producers, productions, broadcasters who are prepared to do the hard work of mastering the technology, understanding the aesthetic and craft impact of the new technologies, and then figuring out how to put those things together to create new value for the customer so that they stay in our ecosystem and want to keep spending money with us every month, over the top or otherwise. Frankly, I don't care. The vehicle shouldn't matter ultimately, but we need to create that value for the customer to keep them in and to keep moving the ball down the field. So that was the big message for us. It wasn't about individual toys. There's 1 million square feet of toys at that show. You can't throw a stick without hitting something that's seriously cool. But to actually hear not someone talk about what they think is coming next, but to actually sit in a small dark room and hear it and be able to hold a remote in your hand and go, oh, I'd like to hear it this way. I'd like to see that. I'd like to, that it made it real in a way that we're really eager to get there. So.
Great.
Up is still loud, down is still quiet.